Let's solve homework exercise number 5 from section 3.7. Translate the argument into symbolic form, then determine whether the argument is valid or invalid. We can either use a truth table or compare to a standard valid or invalid form. Okay, Rick volunteer, again, they don't say which is P and Q, so I guess it starts out with a P, so we'll just say Rick volunteered as P. And again, you really don't need the comma. It's just the word or means it's a disjunction. So we got the symbol for disjunction, or they need a babysitter, which we'll assume will be the other statement Q. All right, today they need a babysitter, which is the exact same statement Q. Therefore, today Rick did not volunteer, which would be the negation of P, right? Because we said P is he did volunteer. So there's our statement in symbolic form. Now, is the argument valid or invalid? On page 186 of your textbook, there are 4 invalid arguments, 4 forms of invalid arguments. It's the second row on page 186. One of them is given if you've got if P or Q, and you've got the second one Q, then when you conclude the negation of P, this you can never do. This follows the exact form of one of the invalid arguments. You can see here we got the exact form from what we just symbolized here. So it is the same exact form of one of the invalid arguments, so we definitely know that the answer, that the argument will be invalid. We don't have to do a truth table because we know from comparing on page 186 on the textbook, it fits one of the invalid arguments. It's called misuse of disjunctive reasoning. Okay? So we're not forced to use a truth table. So again, it was what? P or Q, and Q, therefore not P. We symbolize, and we definitely said it fits the form of one of the invalid arguments. All right, very good. All right, let's look at homework exercise number 6. Okay, translate it into symbolic form again, determine if valid or invalid. Either do a truth table or compare to a standard valid or invalid form. All right, so let's see what we got here. He likes to eat steak. In this case, P is he likes to eat steak, so P. Or, so it's disjunction, he will go out to eat. He will go out to eat is Q, so that's P or Q. He will not go out to eat, which is negation of Q, right? It's got the not in there, so negation of Q. There's our 2 premises. Our conclusion is he likes to eat steak, which is P. Now again, on page 186 of the textbook, you have one of the 4 valid, which is the, I think it's the third one, the disjunctive reasoning. If you've got 2 statements, P or Q, and you got the negation of either one, the second one in this case, therefore you can definitely conclude that the other one happened. You can conclude P. This, you can see here, matches exactly on page 186 the valid form of the disjunctive reasoning. Since we actually matched, our argument matched the valid, one of the valids, we know the argument is valid. We're not forced to do a truth table. Now, in terms of the symbolic form, what you need to write it is in one statement, which is you write brackets, and then you put the first premise, which is P or Q, and then a disjunction, the second premise, which is not Q, and then you end the brackets. That's the if part, and then it's a completely if-then. That's the if part, and the then part is the conclusion, which in this case is simply P. So that's the format that you have to put, the symbolic form, and we know the argument is valid because it matched one of those forms. Okay? So there's the answer they're looking for. So let's go ahead and put that in. So it is valid, and we got to put in first a bracket, then a paren, and we've got P or Q is the first premise, and the second premise is not Q, and then we have our bracket, and then it's an if-then, so a right arrow with the conclusion, which was simply P. And we've got it correct. Very good. All right, let's look at homework exercise number 7. Translate each argument in symbolic form. Determine whether it's valid or invalid. Either use a truth table or compare to a standard valid or invalid form. Okay, so first let's put it into symbolic form. If she walks often, which is P, right? So if P, then she will not be healthy. Q is she will be healthy. So with the not, this would be not Q. She does not walk often, which is not P. Therefore, she will be healthy, which is Q. Okay? Will be healthy is Q. Okay? So there's our form. Now, what you have is, on page 186 of the textbook, one of the invalid forms is misuse of the inverse. It says if you've got if P, then Q, okay, and you're given, and then you got the negation of P, the antecedent. Therefore, trying to conclude the negation of Q, you can't do that because it's the fallacy of assuming the inverse. Because if you're given a conditional, if P then Q, the inverse is not P then not Q is not logically equivalent to the original conditional. So that's why it is invalid. Now notice here, what happens is you have this basically matches the same. You've got if P then not Q. Okay, instead of a Q, we've got a not Q, but we still have what? The negation of P. Therefore, we take the opposite. If you got the opposite of not Q, in this case is Q, because Q, the opposite of not Q, so it matches. It's just that instead of a Q, you have a not Q here. Instead of a Q here, you'd have a Q because they're opposites. So they do match, even though the negation is switched around. You can still say it follows the same form. So you definitely know this matches one of the invalid. So the argument is invalid, and then you would write it as if P then not Q is one premise, and premise number 2, not P. Put that in the if part, and then the then part, so a right arrow, and the conclusion is Q. And if you did a truth table, you would not get a tautology, which would tell you that the argument is invalid. Again, you don't need to worry about that because we did it matching one of the invalid forms. So if P, then not Q, and not P, you cannot conclude Q, that because it is an invalid. It matches one of the invalid forms. All right, let's go ahead and put that in and make sure we have it correct. So the argument is invalid. We've got a bracket and then a parentheses. Premise 1 is if P, then not Q. If P, then not Q, in parentheses. And premise number 2 was not P. Put that all in brackets, and then it's an if-then, so a right arrow, and the conclusion was simply Q. And we've got it done. All right, very good. This concludes this session. I hope this is your math teacher, Dr. Swears. I hope you found this video helpful. If you need more help with any of these problems, just send me an email through the inbox, using the inbox through the Canvas course at the FSW portal. Again, thank you for listening and viewing this video, and send me an email through the inbox if you have more questions or need more help. Thank you.